You've heard of Bunker Hill. You've read about Saratoga. You've seen paintings of Washington crossing the Delaware. But what if I told you that one of the most critical American victories, the one that turned the tide of the war, is a battle most history books barely mention? No polished uniforms, no professional army, no founding fathers, just a group of ragged frontiersmen, farmers, blacksmiths, neighbors, armed with rusted muskets, sheer will, and the rage of a people pushed too far. They didn't fight for glory. They weren't trained for war. They weren't even supposed to win. And yet, on a rocky ridge deep in the Carolina backcountry, they shattered the myth of British superiority. Their story isn't told in classrooms. Their names aren't carved in monuments. But their defiance changed the course of history. This isn't just a tale of guns and smoke. This is about the human spirit, raw, wounded, unrelenting. The Empire never saw them coming. The world never believed they could. But they came. They climbed. They conquered. This is the forgotten battle that saved America. This is King's Mountain, 1779. The American colonies are bleeding. Years of rebellion have left cities in ruins, families shattered, and hope flickering like a candle in the wind. The British crown smells victory, not in the north, where Washington still holds ground, but in the south. The strategy? Crush the heartland, rally loyalists, divide, intimidate, conquer. Enter Major Patrick Ferguson, a rising British officer. Brilliant, arrogant. He believed the backcountry rebels were little more than savages with pitchforks. Ferguson's mission? Arm the Loyalists, extinguish rebellion, and terrify the frontier into submission. So he sent a message. If these mountain men do not desist from their opposition to the British arms, I shall march over the mountains, hang their leaders, and lay waste to their country with fire and sword. He believed fear would hold them back, that the mountains would protect him, that farmers would never rise. He was wrong. They read his words and came down from the mountains. It wasn't just a threat. To the Overmountain settlements, isolated, proud communities west of the Blue Ridge, it was personal. They had seen what British authority looked like. Farms burned, fathers hanged, children buried. So when Ferguson promised to cross the mountains and burn their homes, it didn't bring fear. It brought fury. These weren't professional soldiers. They were survivors. And now, they were done waiting. In taverns, cabins, and clearings, word spread. Names were whispered. Isaac Shelby, John Sevier, William Campbell, not generals, but respected men of grit. Riders galloped through the valleys. Powder was packed. Blades were sharpened. They weren't marching to protect a government. They were marching to defend the dead. Ferguson had drawn a line. They would answer, not with words, but with thunder. He told them to stay in their hills. Instead, they came for him. They weren't soldiers. They wore no uniforms. Many had never seen battle, but they knew loss, and they knew the land. They were farmers, preachers, hunters, teenage boys. Some wore shoes falling apart. Others carried rifles passed down by their fathers. Some carved their children's names into their powder horns. They knew the risks. Still, they came. From Watauga, Holston, and the Catawba frontier, they rode, one by one, bound not by rank, but by purpose. Ferguson called them savages, but history would call them the Overmountain Men. They brought tomahawks, long rifles, resolve. What they lacked in discipline, they made up for in conviction. This wasn't about patriotism. It was about vengeance and survival. Each man carried a scar, a burned home, a dead child, a wounded past. At Sycamore Shoals, they gathered beneath a gray sky and made a vow. We'll not wait for the war to reach our homes again. We'll carry it to his. They left their farms and became fire. September 1780. The march began. Over 1,000 men crossed the Blue Ridge Mountains, through storms, hunger, and exhaustion. They had no tents, no supply wagons, just wet blankets, flintlock rifles, and determination. They marched on boiled cornmeal. They buried their dead along the trail. They kept going. Because they weren't just marching toward Ferguson. They were marching toward identity. They became a force, a brotherhood, a legend in motion. Each night by firelight, they whispered prayers, not for safety, but for justice. And somewhere in the shadows, a voice murmured, "We may not live to see the dawn, but if we fall, let it be on our feet." They were no longer just men. They were memory in motion. October 7th, 1780. Ferguson chose Kings Mountain, a steep ridge, hard to scale, easy to defend. He didn't know. He was surrounded. The Overmountain Men split into 4 groups, silently, strategically. At first, only silence. Then a shot. Then another. Then, the mountain roared. The Loyalists fired downhill in formation. But the Patriots didn't fight in formation. They rose from behind rocks, fired, vanished into trees, then rose again, somewhere else. It wasn't an army. It was a storm. Bayonet charges failed. Smoke smothered the air. The Loyalists began to break. They weren't fighting trained militia. They were fighting ghosts with guns and a reason to kill. What Ferguson thought was high ground became a trap, and the mountain was closing in. The fight lasted just over an hour, but in that hour, the war changed. Ferguson rode through the chaos, blowing his silver whistle, trying to rally his men. But his voice was lost in the thunder of fire. One by one, they fell. The Loyalists begged for mercy, but few would be given. The Overmountain Men remembered. The ashes, the graves, the screams. This wasn't a battle. This was a reckoning. Ferguson tried to flee, riding downhill, sword flashing. But the men had waited for that moment. 7 bullets ripped through him. He fell from his horse, dead before he hit the ground, his whistle still clutched in hand. And just like that, the ridge fell silent. Nearly 300 Loyalists were dead or wounded. 700 surrendered. The Overmountain Men lost just 28. In 1 hour. An empire was humiliated. And a myth that British troops were unbeatable was shattered. In 1 hour, the mountain spoke, and history listened. News of Ferguson's death spread fast, but London didn't brag about it. They buried it, behind closed doors. British commanders were rattled. Loyalist morale collapsed. Support in the South withered. Cornwallis, advancing into North Carolina, retreated. Because now he knew. The Overmountain Men were real, and they were coming. Kings Mountain didn't win the war, but it changed its shape. It set the path toward Cowpens, Guilford Courthouse, and Yorktown. It was a crack in the foundation of empire, made not by diplomats, but by farmers. The tide turned, not in a city, but on a lonely ridge. Today, Kings Mountain is quiet. No great monuments, no parades, just trees and wind. Ask someone about the Revolution, and they'll name Washington, Valley Forge, Saratoga, but not this hill, not these men. Because history remembers the powerful, not the barefoot, not the nameless. But maybe it's time we do. Because in just over an hour, 1,000 farmers, blacksmiths, and boys stopped an empire. No medals, no orders, just conviction. Ferguson lies buried there still, unmarked, forgotten. But the mountain remembers, and now, so do you. The Battle of Kings Mountain, October 7th, 1780. the day America's farmers turned the tide of war. The victory history forgot, but freedom remembered.